Now, in terms of the golf swing, like I mentioned, grip is very strong. Now, the number one tell of this, without even looking at the face-on video, is when the club face is very toe down here at this point in the backswing, but with the logo of your glove pointing up to the sky, you look like you're rotating your forearms and cupping the wrist quite a bit here in the takeaway, and yet the face angle is still closed. The only way that would ever be the case is if the grip's in a pretty strong position, right? So naturally, you're going to have the club face be a little bit more closed. But like I said, despite the club face being more closed, you're going to have the lead wrist be a little bit more cupped when the grip is strong. So that's not really a concern of mine, if I'm being honest, just because it's kind of expected. I actually really like the backswing. In fact, I like the backswing so much that I don't believe it's something you need to really concern yourself with. I see that the shoulder plane looks really good. Pelvic tilt is slightly tilted downwards. This just happens naturally because your knees are changing flex here. Front knee is adding a little bit more bend. The back knee is pulling back a little bit more. You don't have the biggest hip turn, but to be completely honest, it's also not necessary. And the reason being for me is because the arm plane is in a really good spot here. We can see the hands over the heels of your feet. And if you would pull this hip further back and load a little bit more into the right hip, your hands would get a little too deep in behind your body. So it's not something that's necessary at this point with your golf swing. I think your alignments are very good. I like where the shaft is pointing at the top. Like I said, the strong grip is always going to keep the club face a little bit more closed. And so I actually don't think you need to load any deeper into the hip. Even though there's some room to do it, I don't believe it would actually benefit you. In fact, I only think it would cause your hands to get more inside and cause you to get stuck even more from the inside. You mentioned you're hitting hooks and your big miss contact-wise is fat. I think that would actually get amplified if you loaded more into that right hip. So it's not something we need to worry about. Now, to me, all of your problems really are transition-related. If we highlight just the positioning of the hands here and we look at the hands coming down, your hands, in my opinion, have a little bit too much of a vertical drop to them, meaning they do not work outward nearly enough. Golfers who rotate really well into some good tilts and do it at the amount that is required for their pattern, you'll usually see the hand path work a little bit more out towards the golf ball. In your case, your hands have a little bit more drop to them vertically, downward this way. Now, keep in mind, you are rotating a decent amount and you actually retain your tilts quite well. Your front shoulder stays down here at this point. The hips are getting close to square at this point, which is pretty good. The problem is, you can't just look at the hips getting close to square because you didn't really load them very deep in the backswing. So, of course, naturally it'll be easier for them to get back to square when they're not fully rotated back on the way back, right? So the body rotation in general on both sides, the chest and the hips, are a little slow. And because they're a little slow, the hands drop. Whereas if you were to rotate a little bit better and a little sooner, and it's not even a question of the tilts, like I said, it's more the actual rotation, your hands would work a little bit more out in front of you. And so we see this vertical drop taking place here into the downswing. So your hands are caught just a little too deep for my liking at this point. They're a little too inside. In an ideal world, if you were rotating a little better, your hands would be a little bit more out in front of you. And that would help because now your hands are caught so far from the inside that as you drop this club gets stuck a little under the plane and a little too shallow here. Again, like I mentioned, you're a little under rotated with the body alignments. And then we get to impact and we're too squared up. Basically, we need to get these hips a little bit more open. We need to get the chest a little bit more open. And it's not because of aesthetics, although I do believe the aesthetics, also would look better. To me, it's because when the body's a little under-rotated, in your case, it gets you stuck because the club shallow is a little too much and there's nothing to offset that. And then by the time you get to impact, you'll have to flip it with your hands to save it, right? And obviously, if you flip at it too much, it becomes a hook. If you don't flip at it enough, it becomes a block. And just because you're flipping at it with your grip being a little stronger, the club face is a little bit more closed, you have a little bit more likeliness that the ball is going to want to go to the left. So your miss ends up becoming more of a hook, right? So like I said, I think your backswing alignments are very, very good and I wouldn't play with them. But coming down into the golf ball here, we definitely need to start working on influencing this hand path a little bit more outward instead of having the drop that they have to them, because that just gets the hands stuck a little too far from the inside and that gets the club stuck a little too shallow. And when you come down a little too far from the inside and shallow, you got to flip the hands over to save it, or you're going to struggle with some low point and contact issues. So I think the swing is very good. I do believe there's some room for improvement though.